Hi, everyone. Today is Wednesday, March 9th, 2022. I'm Ben Greiner, Director of Apple Technology at Ntiva. Actually, let me switch the placard here. And with me today is Ross Matsuda, our Systems Administrator focused on Apple technology. And today we are going to talk about the benefits of supervised devices and what that means and why you want to do that. But first, as always, we have some news, and Apple had some big news yesterday. They had their yearly, what do you call it, Ross, spring event. I guess is this spring? Are we in spring?
I mean, it's kind of spring.
It was a little bit like winter still, but yes,
yeah.
At least here in Chicago. And Ross, I think you summed it up best in our chat yesterday when you said Apple has released two revolutionary devices, an M1 Max duct tape to another M1 Max, which was a little feature they showed where they had already pre-planned that the M1 Max could connect to another M1 Max, which was pretty cool. I mean, they do it in a slightly better way than duct tape, but it's pretty cool. And then a Mac Mini duct tape to another Mac Mini, and yeah, their new computer, which is kind of small here, but we'll look at it in more detail. Looks like two Mac Minis stacked on top of each other. So really quickly, a new display, which is not $1,000. It's a little more than that. And in fact, with all the add-ons, I think you can spend almost $2,000 on it. Still cheaper than
going.
their. What's that? Keep going. Gets more.
Yeah, it ends up at around $2,600 if you go with their anti-glare and an upgraded stand. And Apple Care. You'll end up at around $26.
So much more affordable than their $5,000 display.
Yes. Yeah. Remarkably so.
And of course they didn't go into any detail. I haven't had time to read the real differences between the two. You know, they touted this as an amazing display. So I was actually, yeah. Anyway, it's still expensive. I was pleasantly surprised by the price of the new Mac. I thought it would be a little more expensive. Although you can spend between these two, you can spend a maximum of I think $10,000 if you got the high-end display and the high-end computer. You would spend $10,000, but it starts more like I think $2,000 or $3,000 for the.
Yeah, the Mac Studio starts at $2,000 with an M1 Max, and if you're going for an Ultra build with their new, M1 Max plus M1 Max equals M1 Ultra, that starts at $4,000.
And of course, this is aimed at video professionals, developers, people doing multimedia. Like it certainly isn't aimed towards anything I'm doing. I don't know, Ross. Maybe we could convince powers that be that you need it for your development world, but I certainly don't need this much power in a computer. Although it's always interesting to see.
Yeah.
The iPhone SE. I know a lot of people who like small phones and prefer Touch ID over Face ID are going to love this phone. I think the only thing I heard it was missing is 5G. It does not have 5G. Do you know? I haven't read up on all.
It has 5G. There are certain bands that it doesn't support.
Oh, okay.
So this is getting to the nitty gritty of cellular tech that, to be honest, I don't spend much time focusing on. But yeah, I mean, it's an entry level priced iPhone that still has a higher end CPU in it. I think it's going to be a great option for a lot of consumers.
Yeah, nice camera. Yeah, it looks great. And introduced new iPad Air, new finishes for iPhone 13. They talked about their new M1 Ultra, which, as you point out, is two M1s tied together. And they announced Major League Baseball. And honestly, Apple makes everything look amazing. They actually almost inspired me to want to watch baseball with their promo. But baseball, I understand, is having issues, and I don't know, what's going to happen there. But yes, you can now watch baseball when it starts, when they actually start playing, I guess, every Friday night. So
there you go.
That's the news. Let's get back to this. Today's topic, benefits of supervised devices. And just as a general summary of what supervision is, supervision provides additional control over devices owned by your organization. And those devices, actually, before we talk about the devices, we do have a little tag in VisionBot There's a little supervised tag. I'm zooming in on it here. So when you go into VisionBot and look at your devices, you will know whether a device is supervised or not based on that tag. And that is a binary tag, meaning it's either supervised or not. Although Apple kind of threw us a curve because it used to be, before Big Sur, Macs were only supervised if they were in Apple Business Manager. And starting with Big Sur, all Macs that are enrolled in a management system like ours are technically supervised. Did I say that right, Ross?
You did. You did. There used to be a couple ways that a Mac could be enrolled. It started off just as, is MDM present? Yes, great. And then there was an extra level where after the MDM was installed, a user or an administrator on a Mac needed to go in there and say, yes, this is okay, I approve this. And that was called UA, user approved MDM. Supervision was a separate level on top of that because that had less to do with someone sitting in front of the computer and saying, oh, yeah, I want this to be there. I approve this being there. And supervision was, this is owned by a company, right? And so it's more about an administrator for an organization saying, we bought this Mac, this is our property, so we can, do X, Y, and Z to it. In order to simplify some of that language, Apple just started using the term supervised for what used to be user approved MDM, UAMDM, and made it lines a little bit fuzzier. There are still, of course, great benefits to having your Mac inside of Apple Business Manager. There's a couple wonderful features from that. But we generally just now use the wonderfully concise term is in Apple Business Manager rather than supervised.
Yeah.
Everything's supervised.
Right. So it used to be easy to say, if your Mac is supervised, we knew it was an Apple Business Manager. We knew we could do all things that Apple allows us to do on a Mac. Today, Big Sur or Monterey, you're technically supervised, but if you're not in Apple Business Manager, we don't have all of the benefits of management. So that's a bit of a gray area. It's a lot more black and white when it comes to iOS, and that's what we want to talk about. In fact, it's much more critical with iOS. I think that your devices are supervised. So this is an Apple document, and we're going to go. Oops, let me go back. I thought I had a link to that. Let me grab it. I want to talk about these links. Let's see, let me move this around a little bit. So Apple device enrollment types, there's user enrollment, which Ross referred to some of these when he was summarizing Mac OS. User enrollment means that a user is the one enrolling a device. Is that fair to say, Ross?
Not only are they enrolling a device, but the assumption is they own the device.
Okay.
So user enrollment.
So that's the BYOD model.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Spot on.
So obviously there's no supervision in that model. That's not an option. There's device enrollment. This is only for iOS and iPad OS. There's no supervision in device enrollment. Device enrollment really is just on those devices that don't have a user per se. Is that what they mean by that?
Yes, with an asterisk. I've also heard device enrollment as being the generalized term used for Mac OS enrollment. Now, I suppose we could call that enrollment supervision.
Yeah.
But how I would observe it is user enrollment can be for Mac or iOS. And that just means, hey, I own my device. We're getting it enrolled with your organization, so you can do get some basic information on it, but not really do a lot to it. Device enrollment for iOS is the next step up that allows you to take a couple actions, right, to make some changes to that device. And for the Mac, this is pretty much the place where we live 24/7, right? Like the vast majority of devices for our clients that do not have Apple Business Manager set up and configured, everything rolls through device enrollment, and we're able to take great care of those machines.
I guess this is where they're getting confused, because it used to be device enrollment would have been Mac OS, no, but now technically it is.
Technically.
Yeah, so there's some confusion in this document. And then automated device enrollment, which is really where we want to get everyone to, because that's just the easiest for everyone It's easy for us. It's easy for the client. It's automated. It gives you everything you need.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a gray area that's changing. And user enrollment, I like the concept, but honestly, it's really frustrating for us, because if a user enrolls a personal device under user enrollment, there's a perception that we can help them at the same level that we can help them through automated device enrollment, and that's not always true. So
Yeah.
sometimes our hands are tied, that we cannot always help a client who does user enrollment. Anyway, we're getting into the weeds. I didn't mean to do that, because let's get into supervision. There are two ways to get an iOS device supervised: either through automated device enrollment, which is the preferred method, or manually through Apple Configurator, which we know technically works, but it's a lot of effort. It requires you to physically have the device, erase it, connect it to a Mac running Configurator, which enrolls the device, I guess, a special way with a little extra effort so that you can supervise it. And that's only necessary if you miss the opportunity for automated device enrollment. And I say miss the opportunity because if you buy from Apple, there's always a chance that even if you didn't have Apple Business Manager when you bought from Apple, that if you bought within the last few years, you could possibly get those devices attached to Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager. I say there's a possibility because there seems to always be caveats where it doesn't quite work. And if you did not buy from Apple, it's even more or less of a chance that you're going to get those devices attached to Apple Business Manager, Apple School Manager. So that's why we're trying to get all of our clients to, from the very beginning, buy from an authorized Apple reseller that will work with Apple Business Manager or School Manager, or buy directly from Apple, ideally through their e-commerce store, which is guaranteed to be attached to your Apple Business Manager. But worst case, we have done projects where we've used Configurator to get these devices enrolled. So enrolled as supervised devices. So why do we want to do that? And Apple has an article about Apple device supervision. And actually, I'm going to skip through that. And they have a series of pages here that I want to review, because this is where they get into a lot of details that I think it's really interesting. So MDM restrictions, let's start with this page. And I'm just going to do a search for supervised. And when we get down here, we start to see that there are certain things that require supervision. And this is not the best page. Probably get to another one in a minute. This is more technical restrictions. But is there anything on this list, Ross, that you want to talk about? Otherwise, I'm going to go to the next page.
Oh, geez, there's a ton. Remember, the basic idea behind supervision, if you want to just zoom out really, really far on it, it's the idea that I as an organization, I legally own this device. And that means I can do anything I need to it. If you're enrolling a device using device enrollment, you're able to add things to that iOS device. So like you could, for example, you could push a Wi-Fi profile. You could help someone download an app. And you're just like adding some additional things on top. With supervision, with something that your organization owns, you need that incredible level of control to be able to take things away. And that's why restrictions come up so much talking about supervision, because any consumer could have a phone and they download a bad link, and they get their device enrolled, by a bad actor. That bad actor can now apply some things to the phone. Thankfully, though, because supervision is a much higher hurdle, unless that device is supervised, that bad actor couldn't put your device in lost mode. Right? They couldn't lock it into single app mode. They couldn't turn off your ability to open the App Store or open Safari. And so by keeping pretty much what these supervised actions and controls are, it allows you to take away functionality from these devices if you want to. We'll see this really commonly if you've been to a restaurant, and they come out with menus on iPads. And that's all the iPad can do. You hit the home button, it won't leave the application. If you run into a kiosk that uses an iPad as point of sale, using some restrictions for these supervised devices would allow you to say, oh, turn off some of the accessibility controls, make sure it can only get online using a Wi-Fi network that we specified when it first got enrolled. Make sure that it only opens this app and stays on this app. And so those are probably some of the bigger restrictions you're going to want to see. But the easiest way to think about it is that when you have a supervised iOS device, that's the level of control you need to take something away from that iOS device.
Yeah, and you mentioned something that I think is super important. And why is it that we have to spend some effort in the beginning to set up automated device enrollment, or why does Apple make it difficult using configurator to supervise a device? And that's because there has to be some extra level of authentication and verification before you're granted these abilities to manage your devices. You have to really prove that you own these devices before they're going to grant you the ability to do this. And this is the first example that came up. There are quite a few on this page. So either enable or disable lost mode on an iOS device or iPad. This can only be done if the device is supervised. And Apple is very much into security and privacy. So they don't allow you, even if you completely own this device, they don't allow you to track the location of this device unless you put it into lost mode. Once it's in lost mode, then you can ascertain the location. But obviously, it's not going to happen without the user knowing, because it's going to be in lost mode, which is like putting a big banner on the device saying, if found, please contact us. It's going to lock the device. And so I think that's a good way to think of it, is if you have the privileges to do this, you've proven it, and then you can use these supervision features. So let's go through here. Install an operating system update. That has to be supervised. That's a big request we get. Like, we want our devices to be up to date with the latest OS. And you can only do that if a device is supervised. You could enroll a device into our system, but without supervision, we're not going to be able to enforce or install an operating system update. Let's see what else we got here. Play lost sound mode. Restart the device.
Yeah, that I thought was an interesting one, because fun fact, for organizations that have a lot of iOS devices already out in their fleets that aren't supervised at the moment, or maybe you have no management and you want to get them supervised, but it is possible for a device enrolled iOS device for us to push an erase command in case the device is lost or stolen, but we don't have direct control over things like forcing a restart, forcing a shutdown. We can't do things that would degrade the user experience to the point where it felt like the device was being held hostage. When we're talking about using lost mode, about interrupting, when updates are run, power cycling devices, things like that, we're starting to get into some behaviors that could be, that start to sound like, holding a device hostage, right? So this is by holding all this stuff inside supervision. I think that's one of the main reasons you don't see ransomware for iOS.
Mm-hmm.
It is because there's such a high bar you have to clear to prove that your organization owns the device before you can start doing these things. That would impede the user experience, even if it's for the better in the case of OS updates.
Yeah, and something related to that is the fact that Apple will make changes to the spec, and they have over the years. So there could be one version of the OS where supervision is not required for a particular feature, and then with the next update, supervision is required. So they have made changes, and they continue to fine tune this, and they continue to, I think, add more features to supervision. I don't think they're reducing their reliance on supervision. They're expanding it. And that's why I think it's also important, even if you think, well, I don't need to do any of this today, I would say, well, as an organization, you should get into the ecosystem now, because if something happens or your environment changes and suddenly you have a reason to shut down a device, you may want that supervision. Let's see, MDM. So that's a list of MDM commands for Apple devices. MDM settings. Some of these, I must be honest, they're like they don't always make logical sense to me at first. I have to refresh and become familiar with them again. Like why, what's the difference between MDM setting commands versus MDM commands? Like this seems a little abstract to me, but Ross, you spend more time with this than I do, so maybe it makes more sense to you. But I often find that it makes sense once I read it, but then I'll quickly forget it, and days will go by, and I'll come back and be like, "Yeah, I got to refresh this again." So here's some other commands. Let's see: set software update cadence, set time zone, set wallpaper. I don't know that wallpaper used to be supervised, but it is now.
The two on this list that always kind of perk my ears up as being a little unusual are wallpaper and device name. Because I would think that those are innocuous enough that you wouldn't require that high degree of control, but you do. And it's a great example of something where you can, someone reaches out to us like, oh, we just want to push our new corporate logo out as our wallpaper for our iPads. And we're like, all right, well, we got to supervise your stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like you always say, Ben, it's like we're all just playing in Apple's world here. And to reiterate what you said earlier, if you have corporate owned iOS devices in your fleet, work with us to make sure that your Apple Business Manager that you have one, right? That you've got that account built. It's free of charge. It's not an enormous problem. But make sure that you've got that built now so that as devices change hands, which would be a great time to erase them, that we can try to get them into a supervised state when there's not a lot of pressure, before you run into a situation where suddenly you need to perform an action or Apple changes the rules on what does require supervision. If there's any way for you to get your devices into this highly manageable, highly configurable state before it's necessary, you're going to set yourself up for a much, much better time in the future.
Yeah. And wallpaper is a great example because I've had conversations with prospects where they wanted to do this. And I pointed out that they needed supervised devices, and it was, for them, it was too late. They were already out there and they wanted, or maybe they were enrolled in a system, but not supervised. And I've had people misunderstand that and say, well, so-and-so says they can do it. Why can't you? It's like, well, they probably say they can do it with the asterisk that it has to be supervised, because as you implied, we all, and I say this all the time, we all play in Apple's playground with Apple's playground rules. And it doesn't matter what vendor, partner, product, solution you're using. If Apple says it has to be supervised, it has to be supervised across all solutions. So oftentimes our limitations are not, it's not like, well, we can't do it and someone else can. If we can't do it, it's because Apple does not allow it to happen unless you have these things in place. Let's see, we've activation lock while supervised. Okay, I'm just scrolling through here. And then the last one I wanted to touch on, device information queries. Let's do another search here. Okay, I don't know why I included that in my list.
I suppose it's worth mentioning that we've talked about, right, there's a couple different ways that your device can be enrolled. And we generally focus on what we can do to a device in those different states, what commands we can push, what settings we can control. It is worth knowing that there are also some differences in the data we can collect. This is mainly a bigger deal, not for supervision, but for user enrollment for BYOD devices, where it's very, very restrictive on the information we can collect. But it is just, it's worth noting that there are changes.
And then Ross, you found this great article from, I'd never heard of them. Hexnode.
Yeah, I'll be frank, I haven't either. But boy, did they put together a really nice article about this.
Yeah, so this is an article, it was a screenshot from their article, and I'm pulling it up right now. And I have a feeling this is maybe a company outside of the United States, because this feels translated to me. I always enjoy seeing some translations. This can make way to fatal accidents, such as end user overrides. First of all, I hope nobody managing MDM has a fatal accident. That would be terrible. But I think they're trying to express that you can, without supervision, things can happen. things can change. They say here, though it sounds drastic. Well, yeah, fatal accidents sound pretty drastic. I think maybe they could tone that back a bit. But yeah, this is a great article, and the reason I like it is they really lay out in a lot of detail whether, if a device is supervised, you can do this, and if it's not supervised, maybe you can, maybe you can't. We talked about lost mode, rename a device, remote ring, and because Apple does change this stuff, this is why we need these lists. So I love that they put this together. This is the most comprehensive list I've seen. Even from Apple, you can see I scrolled through several pages to try to make sense of it. I feel like they've kind of summarized it here. And if we go down to advanced restrictions, this is where you can really see the differences. Things like AirDrop, which I know, I love AirDrop, but some people, especially in corporate high security environments, do consider it a security risk, and they don't want AirDrop. So if I'm reading this correctly, Ross, the only way you can restrict AirDrop on a device is if it's supervised.
On an iOS device, that is
iOS
correct.
Device, yeah.
Yes.
Add or remove Touch ID. I didn't know you could restrict that. So, but yes,
yeah, you can restrict all biometrics. There are new keys for enabling or disabling Face ID as well.
Okay. Autocorrect words. That sounds pretty harsh. I don't know why. I would be very frustrated if I had a device that did not allow auto correction of words.
I imagine that would be helpful in certain educational environments.
That's true. I personally don't deal with school manager in schools a lot. But maybe in a school environment, you don't want
There's
that.
Also
I guess
there are also controls in here that deal with multi-user on iPad. So again, coming back to that educational environment, you're going to see some.
Yeah, I suppose
really
if you're giving a spelling quiz on an iPad, autocorrect needs to be off. You can't. Okay, thank you for explaining that to me, Ross. We now have a use case. Pair with Apple Watch. You can't manage an Apple Watch directly. It has to be done through an iOS device, an iPhone. And so apparently, if you wanted to restrict the pairing, you could do that with a supervised. So this is really the most comprehensive list I've seen, and I think it's a good one. And I'll be referencing it for questions like this. And it's a good thing also. You don't. I'm not going to recommend that people go out and do a bunch of restrictions, because that's frustrating. Can be frustrating. But I think it's a good idea to review this list and see what is capable or possible. And maybe that will spur some ideas of how you could reduce your risk or change your workflow, or, there could be some potential ideas that come out of it. So certainly I don't recommend you say, let's turn them all on, because I can't imagine a device being very friendly if we actually did enable all the things possible. But it's certainly worth knowing what's possible. Anything else you want to add to that, Ross?
I think that's the most of it. Just remember, with supervision, it's the sooner you can get working on it, the better, so that it's in place before you need it. That's really the basic goal. And the general idea being only when you have supervision set up is you and Apple both agreeing you own this device, you as an organization own this device, which gives you access to all of these much more powerful controls.
That's right. And if you're not sure if your devices are supervised or not, go into VisionBot. If you're a client of Ntiva, go into VisionBot. You'll see whether they're supervised. If they're not supervised, contact us and let's figure out if we can get them supervised, whether it's through Apple Business Manager retroactively through a recent purchase, or the process of bringing them back, erasing them, using configurator to get them supervised. Or maybe it's time for a refresh, and that's an opportunity to do zero touch auto enrollment deployment, and that would be supervision. So I know we went over just a little bit, but in my research, I did find this one bit of information that I guess I'd been looking for and gave up on. Then I encountered it because we get this question a lot. When I enroll a device, even if it's a company-owned device, these devices feel personal to us, and I'm sure all of us use some personal aspects, the device for some personal things in our life, even if they're company-owned. So this is a great summary from Apple. Even with automated device enrollment, even with the full supervision, MDM can do certain things, but it cannot view your personal email, your calendars, your contacts. It cannot view your iMessages or your browsing history. It cannot do these things that people get concerned about, and rightfully so. It's really device management. It's not personal. It's about privacy and security, really. So yeah. I'm going to be using this when I talk to clients more. And next month, April 13th, I think it is, building an employee choice program. We're building one here at Ntiva. Some of you may already have one and not even realize it. This is how you can make it even better. We'll be talking about that. So, and sorry if I missed any questions. I'm really bad about multitasking. So well, thank you for joining us. We'll see you all next week or next month.
Cheers.
Bye.
Take care.